You always pivot.
No, I don't pivot. I answer
pivot.
you head to head, and I know it disturbs you because you haven't had this kind of talk before.
I actually
but
love
that's
this.
okay.
This is why I came back. If it disturbed me, I would have run away with my tail between my legs. Stop with the ad hominem attacks. It takes
You
away
are
from the
disturbed
quality
by the content of the answers.
No, I'm disturbed.
Because the judgments you make are inaccurate.
With the misrepresentation. So the Communist Manifesto lays out that you are to have no private property. If a communist came to me and told me that that's not debate to campus, because I think there's a sore lack of healthy debate, even if it gets contentious sometimes. So I'd love a round of applause for these But jumping straight into the heat of the issue.
Good.
And just for the sake of being succinct and quick and clear, I think it'd be best to pursue a theme that people have already talked about today, namely sexism in the Bible. And I find that pinning it all in the Old Testament is inaccurate. And I'd like to read you some Bible verses from the New Testament if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
But before I do so, what do you think of books like Corinthians, Ephesians? Would you say that the church should be arranged along the standards that are laid out clearly within the New Testament?
I'm saying that when you get to those issues, those are hard issues of hermeneutics, of interpretation. I can promise you, when Paul writes to a certain young pastor in the city of Ephesus named Timothy that women should not speak, but then he has women partners in ministry who do speak, like Priscilla. When he talks about leadership in a church into a cultural context where you have a goddess, Diana of the Ephesians, being worshipped. So he's speaking into an incredibly chaotic sexual city. You've got to read in context and not just take 1 Timothy 2 and rip it out of context, or 1 Corinthians 11 or 12.
I think that you're kind of misrepresenting specifically what those say. They don't mention the goddess Diana, and they mention some very specific rules that only women are supposed to follow. And I think you see that these rules are the reason that the Catholic Church has been historically sexist, with absolutely no women in positions of power, because they are very clearly laid out in Corinthians. So this is 1 Corinthians 11, 2 through 10. It is well for a man not to touch a woman. Sorry, that's 7. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of every woman is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled dishonors her head. For if a woman will not veil herself, then she should cut off her hair. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. Man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. To me, it lays out a clear submission of women to men, to the point that if a woman, think nuns for instance, take a point of praying without their head covered, which is why nuns wear the habit, they're to have their heads shaved. That says nothing about Diana. That's very clear rules of how the church is to operate in placing women in a position of submission.
Baloney or hogwash. Pick whichever one you want. Why? Because in Acts you do read about Diana of the Ephesians. So you got to go do your homework. You got to read the book of Acts, which includes Paul going into Ephesus. And what he has to deal with is goddess worship, Diana of the Ephesians. So just because he doesn't mention it in 1 Timothy, he's writing to a young man, Timothy, and where is Timothy? He is in Ephesus. So you find out about the goddess worship of Diana of the Ephesians by reading the book of Acts. It's that simple. Second point, read in the Corinthians passage, the context. It is worship that's gone crazy. Women are abusing this new freedom that they have in Christ. And his whole context is he's talking about orderly worship. And so he's addressing women who are getting out of control and are violating some of the cultural norms. Real simple, guys. Now, this doesn't take a PhD. In that culture, short hair on a woman implied prostitution. Real simple. Paul is saying, ladies, don't dress like a prostitute. Don't cut your hair like a prostitute. He is not saying women are inferior. Why? Because he hires a husband-wife team, Aquila and Priscilla, to teach the great preacher Apollos how to preach. That is a position of incredible teaching and authority on the part of a woman named Priscilla. Third and final point, sir, is Paul was attacking and consistently attacked pantheism, the worship of Mother Earth. And that is why in 1 Timothy he's getting into who was created first. Pantheism teaches we come from woman, Mother Earth. And Paul is saying no. Remember back in creation in Genesis? It's Adam who's created first and Eve. It has nothing to do with the value of a man or the value of a woman. It has to do with who came first. It wasn't Mother Earth. And he's going after the pantheism, the goddess worship in Ephesus.
Well, then why didn't the Bible say that? See, the Bible clearly just states that if women pray without their head covered, they are to have their head shaved.
You bet.
Can I find any women in the audience that think that if women pray without a habit over their head, they should have their head shaved? I think God would have been, in his infinite wisdom, intelligent enough to explain that context, because this book is meant to live on.
Good.
But I would argue that instead, it is just the barbaric writings of the time in which women were oppressed.
Beautiful. And I would argue that you have just put on beautiful display your ethnocentrism. You are not allowing a culture in Corinth and a culture in Ephesus to be different. And therefore, you have no ability to appreciate what the Apostle Paul has to do in stepping into a different culture from your culture. And that's what you better start opening your mind to. That there are different cultures, like the one in Ephesus, the one in Corinth, the one in Austin, Texas. And for you to demand that in the Bible God says, oh, by the way, because you guys are really super guys, I'm going to explain in Timothy and in Corinthians exactly what I mean. I'm sorry, it's not going to be that way. Instead, he's giving you a good mind.
I will tell you, it contradicts the foundation of your principles
No,
of
it does
why
not.
the Ephesians and Corinthians were even needed. Because your argument is that there was an unsound culture where women were too free to worship their goddess. And so they needed specific rules of how they could and could not pray. So it seems like the rules of Corinthian are the ones that are ethnocentric against women freely worshiping a goddess. It seems like those rules were culturally insensitive and put into place so that women could not be in a position of power within their own religion.
Paul put them in a position of power when he had Priscilla teach Apollos. Paul put women in position of power to teach men. Priscilla taught Apollos. Stuart?
So we're going to keep going to Paul, right? Is he the center of the Christian faith, or is Christ?
No, I think that...
Okay, so we'll go to Jesus Christ, probably. He's probably the center of the faith. How did Jesus treat women?
I'm not sure. I didn't exist back then.
Okay, you better check out how Jesus... Just read the Bible. How did Jesus treat women? You haven't even checked it out yourself. You went onto Google and you checked out, where's the Bible sexist? Let's pull up
I've read the Bible.
Corinthians and let's pull up Ephesians. You just said you haven't read it. You didn't
No, I
look back
said
there.
I read the Bible
So here's how
last
Jesus treated women. He transcended cultural barriers nonstop. John chapter 4 with the woman at the well. That was breaking the law to reach out to her and to love her. The healing of the woman in the streets with the internal bleeding. Illegal. He's healing her. Constantly reaching out to women. Again, the resurrection. Who is used in the resurrection accounts? Who are the first ones to see the risen Christ? Women. Constantly elevating women in Scripture throughout Jesus' entire life. Secondly, you want to talk about your ethnocentric tendencies? Talk to my Eastern friends who come over to me and say, hey, Stuart, guess what? Actually, the Christian understanding today, the Christian understanding of women's rights, gender equality, is way more liberating than our Eastern understanding. So if you want to talk about ethnocentric, why aren't you talking to them? Are you atheist or what are you?
I'm agnostic.
Okay, from an agnostic, I don't know if you're a humanistic, naturalist, materialist, but from that perspective, you go talk to them and explain to them, this is why women, from my point of view, whether it's agnostic, materialistic, naturalistic, from my point of view, this is how we should treat women. And you cannot back that up from your agnostic, naturalistic.
You can
go ahead and tell me.
And you're assuming things. But
So that's how Christ handles women.
Let me address.
That's how Christ handled
Please
women.
don't talk over me if you want me to address.
No, we'll let you talk, but you better listen, and you better get the point. He gave a beautiful outline of how Jesus treated women.
Right, but in
All right,
in his
you got the
biography-
floor. Talk.
You're right. I never said that Christianity, the book of the Bible, wasn't filled with contradictions or that it was a purely evil document. I think that the Bible is simply as flawed as the men who wrote it within the context of the time. Of course they're going to paint their Messiah to be this perfect moral being, but I don't think it justifies the specific instructions laid out for the church in Corinthians. Would you disavow the Catholic Church's historical record of taking those to be literal and forcing nuns to wear habits and only allowing male
Great question.
priests? But you don't contradict Paul when he thought that the women practicing their own religion needed to be kicked into line and have hats put on their head. And
I
have
can
their
promise
heads
you, if you think the guy who wrote 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter, kicked women into line, you could not be more false.
I mean, it's written very clearly. So at this point, I think we have a pure breakdown of dialogue, because you're almost like acting like those things don't exist and that somehow that there's this built-in context which isn't stated in the Bible. The Bible just states instructions for the church. So at this point, I would urge the audience, I'm going to step away so the next people.
You bet.
But I would urge the audience to read the Bible.
Bravo.
And to understand
That's exactly right.
that the Bible doesn't build in contexts, and that the Catholic Church, when it mistreated women over the years, we're being good Christians because they took the instructions of the church laid out in the Bible literally, which is all you can do from a
You are
whole-
reacting to your narrow-minded Christian background. That's all you're doing. You're not reading the text honestly. I understand why you're turned off by your narrow-minded Christian background. But you got to grow up, guys, and you can't let the Catholic Church or the Baptist Church or whatever Christian fundamentalist you've talked to turn you off. You got to read the text for yourself. That's where we do agree.
Well, I would urge you to not selectively read it and only focus on 3 chapters out of an entire book, because all you speak of is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
That's not
and
3
you
chapters.
always
Those are 4
pivot.
books.
You always pivot.
No, I don't pivot.
You always
I
pivot.
answer you head to head, and I know it disturbs you because you haven't had this kind of talk
No,
before.
I actually
but
love
that's
this. This is why I
okay.
came back. If it disturbed me, I would have run away with my tail between my legs. Stop with the ad hominem attacks. It takes
You
away
are
from the
disturbed
quality
by the content
your-
of the answers.
No, I'm disturbed.
Because the
by-
judgments you
I am
make are
disturbed
inaccurate.
with the misrepresentation. So the Communist Manifesto lays out that you are to have no private property. If a communist came to me and
Yeah.
told me that that's not true and communists are for private property, and then I cite within his document where it specifically says you are not to have private property, to me that is exactly what you're doing. You're doing an absurd, like, oh, well, that's context, it doesn't count. He didn't really mean women.
I
are-
never said it doesn't
No,
count.
you did, because
No,
you said
I
it
did
only
not.
applies
I
to
said you
the-
had better read everything in context. Everything. That's one of the principles of sound interpretation. You read in context. So when Jesus says in Luke 14, I tell you the truth, unless you hate your mom and dad, your wife and children, you cannot be my disciple. You don't jerk that out of context and say, oh guys, Jesus is calling you to hate mom and dad and hate wife and children. No, you read it in context, which is you are to love your mom and dad, you're to love everybody, but your love for God is to make your love for your family pale into hatred when they are compared. And when Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away, you better read in context and not take a knife out and gouge your eye out. You better allow a speaker to use hyperbole, metaphor, extreme form of speech to make a point. That's how you interpret fairly.
All right, well, I would say thank you for this
You
debate.
bet. Good to meet you.
I think to say that I respect certain aspects of what comes out of the Ten Commandments and that Jesus preached is not in contradiction with me being an atheist. Again, I said I think that these values have become innate in humans over time, evolutionarily. I mean, it has benefited us to be altruistic. This is something that the religious institution found and saw that people subscribed to, and so adopted it as their own. I think that the Ten Commandments were thriving within humanity before they were written on a piece of stone. Now, they weren't enacted well because we didn't have an overarching institution. I do think society needs guiding institutions. I do think that. But to make an institution where you're able to claim absolutes, I think it's false. But it provides false comfort.
That's right. So I hope you're going to live out your moral relativism consistently. I hope when a good friend demeans you in some way, you're not going to look them in the face and say, you should not have demeaned me that way. Instead, you're going to say, from my perspective, that was not nice, but I understand your perspective is different. If you're going to be a moral relativist, live it out. And my point to you guys is, you cannot live it
I
out.
didn't say I was a complete moral relativist. Again, the whole
If
monologue.
there is no God, ma'am, you have no choice but to be a moral relativist. And for you to appeal to Camus, when Camus clearly pointed out what he had to do was, he said, you have to muster up the courage to do that which is good. But you've got to realize still, it's ultimately meaningless. But you need to muster up the courage to help hurting people. And I respect that part of Camus. But you see, Camus began to realize, whoa, that's a contradiction. If I'm really valuing so highly courage and helping hurting people and standing against the Nazis, then I am parting company with moral relativism. And that's what Sartre struggled with. Sartre understood what Nazis are doing is not relatively wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And yet his worldview of no God and morality being relative did not match his experience of life. His experience of life was Nazism and gassing Jews is not relatively wrong. It is absolutely wrong. And at the end of his life, Camus probably converted to Christ because he struggled with the question of meaning. He realized the meaninglessness of life. And then he realized, I can't live it out. I can't live it out. It contradicts my experience, my observation of life.
Our perceptions of life are not always what the truth is.
That's for
So
sure.
If I'm colorblind,
Right.
or not, I mean, even if I'm not colorblind, but color exists in our perception, right?
Exactly.
So, yes, it is difficult, which it is impossible to arrive at moral absolutes. But the argument is that there is no one absolute. We have to really think hard about where the peaks are on the moral landscape. Where are those top forms of morality that we can find within humanity? And again, I think to say just because there are different points of morality doesn't mean we know nothing of morality and that we need a God to tell us the absolute. Again, looking at physical health.
I know that, man. Come on, I agree with you. All of my atheist friends live wonderful lives. Let me say it one more time. All of my atheist friends live wonderful lives. My argument is not that if you're an atheist, you don't know what's right and wrong. My argument is the opposite of that. My argument is you atheists know what's right and wrong. That's why you use the word should. You should do that. You should not do that. I'm pleading with you guys, struggle through the issue. This is reality. You should not have demeaned me. You should not have abused that little innocent child. You know there's objective morality. Well, how can there be objective morality? Only if there is a moral lawgiver who creates a child with innate value that is totally violated when you abuse that child. Just read the letter from the Birmingham jail of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King goes down to Birmingham, Alabama. The white Christian ministers are telling him, shut up, black man. The great state of Alabama has decreed that segregation is good. And in his letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. Martin Luther King says, I am aware of what the great state of Alabama has turned into law. But I'm arguing that there is a law above the law of the great state of Alabama. And according to that law, racism and segregation are wrong. And obviously what Dr. Martin Luther King is appealing to is the law of God. It's that simple. This is not really complex.
Okay, I think I'll end on just this one, which is referring to the child that's abused, right? The only way we can know that it was wrong to abuse that child is because God tells us so.
No, false. I did not say that. You've not listened to me. Every atheist friend, I bent over backwards, man. I'm not sure what's wrong. I told you, every atheist friend of mine lives a good life.
Right.
And the atheist friend doesn't say, oh, the abuse of an innocent child is wrong because I think there's a God. No, my atheist friend does not believe there's a God, and none of my atheist friends support child abuse. None of them.
So what's the reason then that you said with we need God to understand? You had mentioned God and child abuse, and that's how we know absolute right and wrong, right? I want to make sure that I did get that part right.
I'm going to try and break this down as simply as I can.
Yes, please dumb it down for me.
The atheist friends of mine all live good lives. But the atheist friend of mine, when she says the abuse of an innocent child is absolutely wrong, is contradicting herself. She should be saying the abuse of an innocent child is wrong from my perspective, because morality is relative, because there is no moral lawgiver, there's no God. That's my point. Science has nothing to say about what is right and wrong. Science has nothing to say about whether she is worthless or worthwhile. Science can only analyze her body. Psychology can analyze her thought process. But science cannot say that is evil, that is good, that is worthwhile, that is worthless. You have moved from science to philosophy to religion when you start talking about she has innate worth. Her decision to molest someone was evil. Her decision to help someone was good. You are out of science. You're into philosophy and religion. Please be consistent intellectually. That's all I'm pleading with you guys to do.
Given the right circumstances and the right biology to be able to make that choice, right? And unfortunately, not everyone acknowledges that there are biological differences in the brain that, I mean, we can point to through medical advances. So I'm going to point to something that's kind of just obvious to the naked eye, which is, in order for you to be gay, to choose someone of the same sex, right, you have to be one sex fully, and I'd have to be female and choose another female to have sexual intercourse with. What happens when you're born with both a penis and a vagina? How do you make the morally right choice to choose the opposite sex when you're born with both? And is it, and the reason I bring that up is because, I mean, there are women who have been phenotypically female who have been born with XY chromosomes, or if you look in the brain of, you know, one sex, you find, instances of the other. So what would you do in that case?
Okay, if a person is born with both a penis and a vagina, I do not know exactly what they should do. I would encourage them to consult good doctors, have appropriate surgery, but obviously that is a birth defect. So I would turn to medicine to help me straighten out the birth defect, and then I would start making decisions based on that.
Which way would you straighten it out for us?
I do not know. I have never been confronted by that decision, and no friend of mine has ever been confronted by that decision, so I've never been put in a situation where I've had to defend that position. Just off the bat, off the top of my head, what I would say was I would trust whatever the person decides in consultation.
How do they know that they're making the morally right decision in the eyes of God?
Ma'am, if you have a birth defect, what you're going for is health. And whatever you choose when it comes to either being male or female in your sexual organs, because you've been born with both, you make the decision. Pray, ask God for wisdom, if this child is your child, and then make the wisest decision you're able to.
What if I'm terrified that if I make the wrong decision, I am punished for it eternally? And prayer is not enough. I need an answer from the Bible.
But you see, the reason that thinking is so horribly wrong is because the Bible never says that. See, that is my problem with a lot of people.
Or, okay, let's say, or I'm going to be criticized by my community, possibly ostracized. I think it's Missouri, possibly, where 40% of homeless are gay. So, I want to know, what would I do? And prayer is not enough. I need to be told by, I mean, if you're willing to make commands as to what people should do, and tell them you do these things or else you're socially, communally ostracized, in this case, I need an answer.
Oh, okay. Well, I can settle that one very simply. I pastor a church up in Connecticut. At the church where I pastor, we love all people. Many of our people struggle with pornography. Others of our people struggle with adultery and fornication. Others of our people struggle with homosexual sex. We don't ostracize anybody because we all understand we're all sinners and we all are in desperate need of the grace of God. So we don't socially ostracize anybody. We respect and love all people regardless of the decisions they make in their life. To tell you the truth, we have a lot of folks in the church where I pastor who've been in prison for some horrible crimes. We don't ostracize those people. Instead, we acknowledge we all are broken. We all have a sin problem. You express sin one way, I express it a different way. It doesn't matter. We're both sinners in desperate need of God's grace.
So what it seems to kind of keep coming down to is that you don't know, you won't judge, we can't know what happens after life, but for some reason you take a very strict stance that being gay is wrong religiously. And it doesn't, I feel like it's kind of like a cognitive dissonance. You can't say that it's wrong and then say, oh, well, we won't punish, we won't ostracize. We actually don't really know if it's wrong and if you'll really be punished. We just believe it's wrong with no foundation for believing that it is, especially when science contradicts you.
How does science contradict that?
The fact that it makes it a moral conundrum. It makes it impossible for a person with both genitalia to make the right decision.
All right, my gay friends do not have both genitalia.
But right, because that's
Okay.
that's gay. That's different from being born with both. And again, this is a body part that you're able to point to. Your gay friends, if we were to put them under fMRI, we would see certain portions of the brain that are enlarged. It would be similar to someone that is female. We might see higher levels of estrogen.
Yes.
So the reason I point to the genitalia is because that's something that us mere mortals can see with a naked eye, and it seems to be the only thing that we believe in. But if science says, no, look, I can show you images, it doesn't matter. And so that's why I'm even starting with the most blatant, obvious one. I'm not saying your gay friends are born with both genitalia. Mine aren't either. Not that I'm aware of, at least. So, yeah, again, I guess the question comes back to, we don't know the morally right decision, so how can you have such a harsh stance that it's the wrong thing to do?
All right. What is the purpose of life? There is no purpose to life if there is no God. Life is a crapshoot. It's ultimately meaningless.
Have you ever studied existentialism?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Camus and Sartre and Nietzsche say exactly what I just told you. That's why Camus points out the only question modern man must answer is, why not commit suicide? Because there is no God, life is a crapshoot, it's ultimately meaningless.
Well, that's nihilism. I mean, he ultimately does say that we can find meaning in those we love and in the frivolities of life and being able to, you know, walk by and see a beautiful flower and appreciate the astronomical odds that you're even alive and get to enjoy that. But that meaning that I derive from life is one that I do ultimately have to find for myself. And I do think that the atheists have done kind of a terrible job of ushering the next phase of atheism, which is really providing guidance for those who don't believe and finding a way to find fulfillment, because I think that's where the religious have got it hands down. I mean, it's impossible not to feel a religious sensation when I walk into a church and there's the light shining in at just the right angle and the choral music. I mean, I get goosebumps and I have a religious experience. We don't provide that to ours, which I'm hoping will change. But I don't think you need a dictate from some institution to tell you to have meaning.
I agree 100% with that. You don't need a dictate from some religious institution to know what's right or wrong. You're absolutely correct. I agree 110% with you. But if morality is objective, there has to be a moral lawgiver, God. Because if there is no God, then obviously the moral lawgiver is the government, King Arthur, the culture, or the individual.
Or science, I think, can actually be a moral lawgiver in a way.
Or what?
Science. It's imperfect, but we can say what's healthy and what's not, looking at medical, right, physical nutrition. We can make objective facts about what is, and I'm stealing this, by the way, from The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris, which basically says that just because we have different opinions about what is moral because of science doesn't mean we know nothing about what is moral. So same with health. Though some might say being a meat eater or being a vegetarian is better, just because we have different concepts of good doesn't mean they can't be peaks within the moral landscape. Knowing what we know, if anything helps to better human well-being, we can measure that scientifically. If I hit you with a hammer and you bruise and you're in pain, that would fall less on the spectrum of morality, because I can measure through science that you're in physical pain.
Tell that to my dentist.
I don't
Ma'am,
wanna
it's
detract- I don't know.
it's
please
a
don't
whole,
harm me,
it's
ma'am.
an issue
I don't
of
wanna detract
who
from-
are you
I'm
going to
listening
trust to tell you what is good and what is not so good. So, ma'am, it's very simple. There is no way scientifically you can prove to me that he has value or that he's worthless.
Why have you interrupted me, started calling you ma'am, and quit talking to me?
Pardon?
You've quit having a discussion.
No, I have not quit at all. I'm making a very salient point to you. It is impossible, as you said, to scientifically prove something is right or wrong, whether a human being is valuable or invaluable.
I was actually
It's
making an
impossible
opposite
to
argument.
scientifically prove that he is worthwhile or that he's worth less. That is not a scientific question. That is a philosophical question. It's a religious question.
I would disagree.
All right, we strongly disagree. Science is a study of process, physical process. Science has nothing to say about a value of worthwhile or worthless, of justice or injustice.
What about pain or negation of pain?
That's a physical experience, pain.
Does pain translate to value in some way?
At times it does. That's why I asked you about your dentist.
So that-
My dentist, when he hits my tooth with a hammer, he hurts me. But guess what? It is hurt designed to heal me of the cavity.
Right.
So, like it or not, science doesn't tell you whether it's good or evil, right or wrong. Science is a description of process, how the physical organism works. When you start talking about value, worth, justice, now all of a sudden you are out of science into philosophy, theology, religion. It's that simple.
How do you measure, if not for science, how, with justice, right? What makes something more just than the other? Is it
Great
controlled
question.
by God?
Great question. Ma'am, the only reason it is unjust for me to hold back and slap him is because he has value.
Is it because he would also feel pain?
No. He has value.
Nothing to do with it.
He has value. Why? Because he is not a bag of chemicals. He's a human being created in the image of God for a purpose. Because he has purpose, because he's been created by God with innate value, it is unjust for me to take this gift of a hand that God has given me and rake it across his face. You take God out of the picture, and you're up a creek without a paddle when it comes to explaining why there's a value of justice that is being violated when I rake my fist across his face. No, if there is no God, it's all relative. And if I choose to pull out my wallet and feed him money, give him money for lunch, great. But if I choose to haul back and slam him, great, it's my choice. Because morality is relative, and that's what Camus, Sartre, Nietzsche pointed out so well.
I do think the post-relativist model has left a lot of people lacking because it did kind of end off with this, everything is relative, therefore we can't know anything objectively. And I think that's where the atheist movement has conceded over a lot to the religious movement because even scientists, I mean, everyone will say, well, it's not our place to make a moral decision because we're afraid of backlash from academia. But the truth is, if you were to smack him, it would elicit pain. And we can measure to some degree that pain. And I think that starts to warrant why we decide whether something is just or unjust. And it has to do with where it falls on the spectrum of human well-being. If you are increasing pain, then you're moving farther away from that peak within the moral landscape.
Okay, good. So, obviously I'm standing here saying, logically, rationally, it makes no sense to say there is no mind prior to the human mind who defines right and wrong. The human mind creates right and wrong, but there are moral absolutes. That is irrational. It is self-contradictory, ma'am. It's that simple.
I don't think there's absolutes, and I think that's what makes it really difficult to come from religion over to atheism, is that I came from Catholicism, and the biggest thing for me was not having the black and white, this is right, this is wrong. I had to develop a sense of nuance, which even now is still really difficult to contend with. Sometimes something can be both right and wrong. Sometimes something can be painful and be bettering me. So if I go to the gym and I'm working out and I'm in pain,
right?
But I understand it's still leading me to a life of greater satisfaction, not just acute pleasure, which is why I'm not a proponent of hedonism, right? sorry, what was the comment or question back from that?
My comment was, it is illogical to say there is no mind prior to the human mind, which means obviously it's the human mind who creates right and wrong,
Sure.
and therefore there is objective morality. No, no therefore. If the human mind creates right and wrong, then it's your mind, her mind, his mind, my mind, your mind, and none of us have the right to say, I am right and you are wrong. No, I have to say, from my perspective, this is right, but from your perspective, it's wrong. I'm not correct, you're not incorrect, I'm not right, you're not wrong. It's all relative.
I see. So we're going back to kind of like the ego and how everything outside of us is perception, right? So right and wrong is our perception. There is no right outside of us unless, in your opinion, it would be unless there's a God that tells you. There's no other way for us to objectively know what is right or wrong. Is that a correct kind of summation? A little bit?
No, that's incorrect. What I'm simply saying is, if there is no God, it is impossible for there to be an objective right and an objective wrong. If there is no God, it is the individual or the culture or the power elite that define what's right and wrong, which means right and wrong are totally relative depending upon what culture, what power elite, or what individual you're talking to.
Do you think that this kind of gets into the uncanny valley a bit where, I mean, it's possible that we live on a planet in the middle of the universe where objective right and wrongs don't exist. And humans, because that's a scary concept to grapple with, we have to invent an entity that tells us, no, it's okay. There is a right, there is a wrong, there is a heaven, there is a hell, there is a good, there is a bad. Because us existing in this limbo where an action is relative and I have to use my best faculties and culture and those around me to make the best decision is terrifying.
Sure,
That doesn't mean that the answer that religion provides is
Sure,
true.
that's a possibility. That's a possibility, but what you're going to have to also acknowledge is there's another possibility. And that possibility is, I don't want anybody telling me what's right and wrong. Because you see, I grew up in a Catholic background, and I got sick and tired of the Pope and priests and nuns telling me what was right and wrong. So I just jettisoned the whole idea of God and religion because I want to do my thing my way. In fact, I'm an American, which means I'm free, which means don't you dare tell me what's right and wrong. You see, moral relativism is the quickest way to deify my own opinion. The moral relativist is God, plain God, meaning by that, I am deciding what is right and what is wrong. And that's the quickest way I know to deify my own opinion. And ma'am, there's not a human being I know who's not tempted to do that. I certainly am tempted. I resent, at times, God telling me what to do. I want to do my own thing, my own way. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think what you're kind of creating a bit is a straw man, which is where you say, without a God, this is what people will do, and then you tear down that argument.
That is not what I did.
Okay.
You did not listen to me.
Okay.
I was not putting up a straw man. I was thinking logically through the issue.
Okay. This person that you claim to be, that you say possibly represents a large swath of humans, I would say is not necessarily true, and a majority of people, I think, would disagree. I think we all want guidance, but we've kind of grown up with this idea that to have guidance means we are going to go to communism, right? So soft paternalism, libertarian paternalism within a state, right? Even that we've seen it in the elections, that as soon as someone says, you know what, I think I can maybe help you make better decisions, I can guide you, people say, don't tell me what to do. But I think you'll see a large shift, given that a large majority of people my age wanted to vote for a candidate that believe that we need some sort of guidance, is showing kind of a mental zeitgeist. It's showing a shift that we understand that, I mean, 1 in 4 millennials is not religious. And I think we are suffering from kind of a cultural anxiety. We're coming to this conclusion that there is no God, yet where do we get our guidance from? And we know that we're in need of a guidance because we had it once. But I think to say that because there is no objective guidance, therefore the answer must be God, is dogmatic and dangerous. I think we have to leave other options available, and really delve into the uncomfortable questions of philosophy and literature and culture, and come to those meetings. And yes, maybe we do need new institutions that help to guide us, but I think the blind faith one is outdated.
All right, fine. What do you think about Jesus Christ?
That's a loaded question.
No, it's not a loaded
What
question.
aspect?
It's a sincere question. You've been listening to me. I've been listening to you. You just finished a nice monologue. You didn't ask a question, so I'm asking you a question. What do you think about Jesus Christ?
I think he had a lot of incredible morals that humans can look to and obtain guidance from. I think a lot of what he preached is something that belongs to humanity. I think humans had this ability to love, to forgive, to be brothers and sisters to one another, and religion really liked that concept and saw that it was capable of building a community, so they co-opted it for themselves and created an entire institution from it, and then said, unless you believe in my institution, you can't have these things. You can't be moral, you can't be good. I mean, morality and civilization predated Christianity. We have the capacity to be moral people. But, you know, Jesus kind of said it was his, and only with him can you do these things.
No, Jesus did not say that. Jesus had the utmost respect for the 10 Commandments, written 1,000 years before he was born, penned by Moses. Jesus did not say it all starts with me and it's all here. No. He was in total agreement with the 10 Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, written 1,000 years before him. What Jesus did point out is, all of us have broken the 10 Commandments. We have all rebelled against God, and he claimed to be God come to the rescue, to bleed and die on a cross to forgive us, to give us God's grace, which would change us from the inside out, would transform us. And I can promise you, Mr. Trump, Mrs. Clinton cannot transform me. The Republican Party, the Democratic Party cannot transform me. It takes God. It takes Jesus Christ to transform the human heart. And that's what conversion is, the transformation of the human heart by Jesus Christ. And also, not only did Jesus teach a lot of good things, he claimed to be God. So if you respect him, you're in a real catch-22. Because if you respect Christ, he claimed to be God, which means he's either a wacko with delusions of deity, or else he is who he claimed to be, God in human form. Not only that, he claimed that his death was of ultimate significance. He claimed that he bled and died on a cross to save us, to do something for us that we cannot do for ourselves. And his resurrection 3 days later backs up his incredibly powerful claims. If you die and rise from the dead, I promise to listen very carefully to everything you have to say. Jesus died, was buried, 3 days later rose from the dead, which gives him tremendous authority, credibility, trustworthiness.